Good evening, everyone, and thank you very, very much for joining us on the third edition of our lecture series titled India and the World as part of the Center for Policy Research's contribution into events celebrating and commemorating India's 75th independence. We are actually awaiting the arrival of our speaker, who's I think got unexpectedly delayed, but should be joining us shortly. But till then, I thought we could first begin today's program by giving you a brief introduction on about the series, and then engaging Ambassador Shyam Saran in a conversation about India's relationship with Africa, the history of our relationship with Africa, and also specifically Nigeria, before we take the rest of the program forward. So thank you very much to the audience for joining us today, and please bear with us as we move the program forward for today forward. So just by virtue of background, the Center for Policy Research has been organizing this lecture series as part of our celebration of India's 75th independence anniversary. And really the thinking behind the series was to bring to bear, as we celebrated India's independence, India's emergence on the global stage, where we were at the moment of our founding moment after independence, the role we sought to play through the non-aligned movement in the 50s and 60s, how this evolved, how the world saw us and saw the engagements and the role that India was playing on the global stage, but also looking at how these relationships evolved as India sought to carve a role for herself on the global stage, particularly in the post-liberalization era, as the globalization movement unfolded, how India's non-alignment framework evolved, and where we are today. This lecture series is also an attempt to look forward over the next 25 years as India readies herself for commemorating our centenary celebration, to ask the very critical question. The globe is in this very crucial moment of disruption. And in this moment of disruption, what are the critical challenges that India faces as she begins to reassess and shape her role on the global stage, and how best can we leverage our strengths and capacities to engage on the global stage and move forward. So that's the background for this lecture series. The inaugural lecture was given by Peter Verghese from Australia, followed by Nabil Fahmy from Egypt. And today's lecture is by Ibrahim Gambari, who is the Chief of Staff to the President of Nigeria. As we await his arrival, I thought it would be opportune to use this moment to ask Ambassador Saran, who's chairing this series, to give us a sense of the emergence of the making and shaping really of India's relationship with Africa. Of course, the non-alignment movement was at the heart of the early stage of our relationship. But a lot has evolved and changed over the years, and increasingly now India is seeking an economic partnership with Africa. So can you reflect a little bit on the nature of this relationship, the big moments of change that it has undergone, and where you see this going forward?
Thank you very much, Yamini, and it's a difficult job to try and step in the shoes of Ambassador Gambari. I hope there is no sort of technical hitch which is preventing him from joining in. But these things happen. When you are doing things online, you have to be always prepared for these kind of unexpected interruptions. So we hope, like you, that Ambassador Gambari is able to join us during the next few minutes. But yes, it would be worthwhile, I think, in terms of the theme that we are really dealing with, which is the 75th anniversary of India's independence. You know, just to sort of look back on these 75 years, this trajectory, and look forward to what we may be seeing in the next, say, 25 years, when we celebrate 100 years of India's independence. So let me begin by focusing attention a bit on Nigeria itself and giving a sense to you, what my experience has been in the Foreign Service dealing with my Nigerian counterparts. And without hesitation, I would say that among African diplomats, I would rate the Nigerian diplomats, professional diplomats, as some of the most sophisticated in Africa and in the developing world. For example, when I was dealing with disarmament-related issues, I was the alternative representative of India in the Committee on Disarmament in Geneva from 1980 to 1983. And Nigeria was one of the 40 countries represented on that committee. And we had some of the most brilliant and very influential Nigerian diplomats, extremely articulate. I mean, having been, I suppose, like India, a part of the Commonwealth, a part of the old British Empire. They were very fluent in English, very good drafters, similar to India and Pakistan. Most of the resolutions would be drafted by us. And a very strong sense of, African identity, a sense that, Africa's time has come, that Africa has been through a history of suffering, a history of, domination. And yet, many people do not know that Africa has had also a very, very, brilliant past in the, if you look at history as it is coming out now, aesthetics, culture. And of course, let's not forget that all of us owe our origin to Africa. That is where we all came from in a sense. It was, I think, a very major, decision taken by Jawaharlal Nehru, our first Prime Minister, that in going forward, India's own cause, India's own role as one of the first countries to emerge out of colonialism would actually require a very deep partnership with Africa. And this was right from the beginning. And one of the very major initiatives taken by India was to really lead the anti-colonial struggle in the newly found United Nations. The entire sort of movement for country after country in Africa becoming independent, some of them going through a lot of struggle, taking inspiration in a sense for what India had been through, or the Indian mobilization of international opinion, particularly in the United Nations against apartheid in South Africa. These were people perhaps forget, these were really pioneering efforts of Indian diplomacy, and won India a great deal of, I would say, respect and a certain even affection amongst the African countries for the role that India was playing.
Ambassador Saran, if I may interrupt you, Excellency Ibrahim Gambari has joined us. So
welcome to you.
We're just waiting for him to turn on his video so that we can start with the official proceedings. So just give us a moment.
Welcome to you, Excellency.
Oh, thank you, Your Excellency. I'm so happy. I've just come back from the airport to see my president who has gone to the UAE.
I fully understand, sir. Fully understand.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
sir.
Thank you so much. It's good to see you. Really good to see you, and I'm glad to finally be able to appear.
You have always been such a pillar of support for us. We were so happy to, welcome you to India when we were having our CPR dialogue. So it is an absolute pleasure to have you, speak to us again on this very special occasion. So I think just to save time, Excellency, because I know that you also have a very busy schedule, Let me just very briefly introduce Your Excellency, and then I will request you to, speak, for the next 30 minutes or so, whatever you would like to.
Correct.
And then we will have a very brief conversation between the two of us. Is that okay, Excellency?
So that's very much so. You know, your wishes are my command. You know that.
No, I would certainly not like to be in that position. So welcome to you, Excellency, once again. And just for our audience who are logged in to hear your lecture, let me say that Ambassador Ibrahim Gambari is currently the Chief of Staff of the President of Nigeria, a very, very important position. He has been the founder and chairman of the Savannah Center for Diplomacy, Democracy and Development. It is a non-governmental think tank which focuses on research and policy studies on conflict prevention and resolution, as well as the promotion of democracy throughout Africa. Professor Gambari has served as Director General at the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs. He was Foreign Minister and also Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Nigeria to the UN. At the international level, of course, he has been in a number of commissions, and the first time I met Ambassador Gambari was precisely because we were serving together in one of these international commissions on the UN. And more importantly, he has also served as the UN Secretary General's Special Advisor on Africa. And he has been also, if I'm not mistaken, Excellency, Special Envoy to Myanmar. And played a very, very important role, in the kind of political, evolution that was taking place. Unfortunately, we have a setback now in Myanmar, but Excellency played a very, very important role in that respect. So it is a great pleasure for us to welcome him, especially because I was just explaining, Excellency, before you joined, that India has had a very special relationship with Africa. I was trying to, put across to our audience that, after India became independent, the UN was established. One of the most important initiatives taken in the early days of the UN was the decolonization movement, and India being one of the first countries to, come out of the of colonial rule, really tried very, very much to mobilize international opinion for taking the decolonization process forward. And this, of course, for Africa was a very, very important development. And the other one was, of course, the mobilizing of international opinion at the UN against apartheid in South Africa. That was also a major effort made by India. And through the Cold War years, my own experience as a diplomat was how closely we worked together with our friends from Nigeria on, we talk about non-alignment, but non-alignment was not taking sides, but really trying to create a whole zone of peace and development, a positive contribution rather than just a negative one of staying away from conflict. So this is the backdrop, and Excellency, no better person than you to really give us a sense of how you see India at this very important juncture of us, 75 years of our independence. And perhaps, what expectations does Africa have of India? Excellency, you have the floor, sir.
Great. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, my dear friend and colleague, and somebody that I have the highest admiration for, Ambassador Shyam, Saran, and of course, my other boss, Yamini Aya. I say my other boss because she had been very instrumental in getting me to come to India to attend some of the one of the series of lectures of the CPR. And I'll me therefore to begin by expressing my appreciation to the board, the management and staff of the world famous Center for Policy Research, CPR, for the kind invitation extended to me to speak to you today as part of the lecture series on India and the world. My understanding is that today's lecture is the third in the series Now, although the invitation to speak reached me at a very busy time in my schedule, but frankly, there's hardly any idle moment or a low season in my current role. Before I proceed, however, it's important that I state that I currently serve as the Chief of Staff to the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. However, I'm here today as part of this series in my personal capacity and as a scholar of international relations. Nonetheless, in spite of the demands in my role, my current position is with much gratitude that I accept the honor and indeed and privilege to this invitation as a mark of immense admiration I have for CPR and the respect I have for India, which my country has had, with which my country has more than 6 decades of unbroken and mutually beneficial relation. Because the idea of India as a progressive, as a secular state that manages diversity is something that is of tremendous interest to Nigeria and several African countries, because as many of you may know, many of the boundaries of countries in Africa are totally artificial. Many times dividing people who should be united and uniting people who perhaps should in fact be separated. But the idea of India as a country that is united and peaceful and prosperous and managing diversity is something that is very dear to Africans in general, but Nigeria in particular. And I think this is something that I hope that India will always keep in mind, that what it represents for India, what it represents in the region, what it represents in the countries of the South, what it represents in the world is of tremendous interest to us in Africa and a sense of admiration. Like some of the regions of Africa, India is an old civilization with an illustrious history that dates back to ancient times. History tells us that way before the advent of the first European adventurers in Africa and in the Indian subcontinent, the two regions of the world already had flourishing relationships between them. Much of these relationships were built around commerce across the Indian Ocean and involved the movement of population, the transfer of technology, and the exchange of ideas, exchange of cultures, including especially food. The colonial imposition that saw both Africa and India fall under European rule was to disrupt and distort the substance of that relationship between them. Although it was only a matter of time, however, before knowledge gained and experience built by the British in their rule over India were to be applied in Africa. Of particular interest to me is the importation by the British of the concept and system of indirect rule that have been tried out by the British colonial administrators in India and then transferred to my own country, Nigeria, particularly the northern region of our country. We also had Lord Frederick Lugard, the primary exponent of this indirect rule idea and indirect rule system, has cut his teeth as an administrator in India. Also, on the strength of the lessons of experience from the building of a trans-Indian railway system to facilitate colonial administration and commerce, indentured labor from the subcontinent, which was exported by the British to Africa, especially to the Eastern and Southern Africa. The deep historic bonds that have tied Africa and India to each other manifested themselves in good times as well as in seasons of adversity. As the august audience participating in this lecture will know, Mahatma Gandhi, the founding spirit of independent India, who became the scourge of the British or even the Europeans in general, colonialism in the Southern Hemisphere, and successfully championed the use of non-violence, mass resistance, and boycott to help dismantle Western imperial rule. Coming of age in South Africa, where he came face to face with white racism, which he resented and protested vehemently, Gandhi subsequently decided to return to India, where he began the fight against continued colonial rule in the subcontinent. He carried memories and influences from South Africa with him as he sharpened his understanding of the inherent injustice and oppression that was embodied in colonialism and colonial rule. Gandhi's campaign of nonviolent mass disobedience and civil resistance successfully mobilized the people of India behind the movement towards independence. It is also important. It also importantly fired the imagination of all colonized and oppressed peoples around the world, including especially Africa. Indeed, consciousness that arose from the movement that he led was refracted into the strategy and tactics of resistance across Africa. In Nigeria, for example, young nationalists organized themselves into what they call the Ezekiel Movement in support of the political activities and aspirations of one of the founding fathers of our own country, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, popularly known as Zik, that used the Gandhian tool of boycotts to pile pressure on the colonial administration. Their slogan was boycott the boycottables, which must be familiar to those who have studied the history and tactics of Gandhi. Boycott the boycottable, which marked the onset in earnest of the Nigerian independence campaign. The independence of India in 1947, when it happened, both challenged African nationalist politicians to organize themselves and their society and to step up their struggle for an end to colonial rule. Indeed, with India independence, the question across Africa is no longer one of whether independence was possible, but when and how independence will be attained. And independence contributed immensely to the complex of factors that turned the table on direct colonial rule and ushered in a new chapter of global affairs. In this way, Indian independence not only inspired, it also bestowed an important leadership on the country in the global South. The leadership role that befell independent India did not take long to be tested as the world was gradually ushered into an era of East-West conflict and Cold War and an accompanying armed race, as well as ideological battle. With many African countries coming to independence, particularly in the early 60s, nationhood from the mid-1950s onward and even the Cold War spread and consolidated India's Pandit Nehru, a much respected statesman who exemplified dignity, exemplified vision, worked with key like-minded African leaders, such as Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana and Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser. And of course, outside of Africa, Sukarno of Indonesia and Joseph Tito of Yugoslavia to establish the non-aligned movement. The non-aligned movement, otherwise known as NAM for short, in its time played an important moderating and balancing role in a deeply polarized global system. In addition to ensuring that its members, based on founding principles, did not get drawn into partisan partnership that will by definition inflame an already fractionalized international order. As my friend and brother, Ambassador Saran said, non-alignment is not negative. It's not just about to whom we are non-aligned, but it is about not taking sides as a matter of routine with any of the ideological blocks in the world, but to look at issues and be guided by principles of peace, principle of solidarity, principle of respect for dignity, and for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence of each and every member of the international community. So we feel that through this movement, Africa and India work very closely together within the United Nations system. And in many ways, African countries, newly independent, saw India as a leader of an idea and giving them an instrument, a platform in which to register their nationhood, their sovereignty, but also contribute in a positive way to an international order and system that is based on equity, that is based on justice, and also on even development. So from the non-aligned movement, we then had, of course, the group of 77 countries. They pressed the case for a new international economic, political, and communication order, and supported the adoption of General Assembly resolutions on the first and second development decades in favor of Africa beginning from 1970. Now, as was also mentioned, the non-aligned movement has several conferences. You had, of course, the Bandung Conference and several other conferences in which we delegitimize colonialism. They delegitimize apartheid and fought vigorously to end colonialism on the African continent, but also to fight against apartheid. I was privileged in this regard to be the last chairman of United Nations Special Committee Against Apartheid, which helped to bring non-racial democratic South Africa into being. And it's also fitting that I represented the Security Council in 1994 at the independence and the birth of a non-racial democratic South Africa with Mandela as the first president. So we saw India as a partner, India as a leader, India as deeply committed to some of the most basic principles and ideas that is very dear to the African continent, which is, of course, independence, the fight against colonialism, and the end of apartheid. And also, apart from the expansion of economic relations with Africa, especially in trade and investment, India has supported African post-independence efforts through assistance in critical fields such as education and health, with thousands of teachers, especially in the sciences and health professionals, helping to operate the continent's growing educational and public health system. India was not only a strategic political ally to Africa, but also one of the most important economic and development partners in the context of South-South cooperation. That road has continued to this day, even though the times have changed radically, especially since the 60s and 70s. This is clearly displayed in the significant growth of the Indian economy from an approximate figure of 30 billion US dollars to around 3 trillion. This growth has largely been driven by significant investment in education and legislating education as a fundamental right of children in the 6 to 14 years age group, which has been made into law via the 86th Amendment. The introduction of midday meals program in the 1990s, and today India has over 1,000 universities spread over public and private ownership structures. A critical space where this growth has also been recorded is in the technology and services sector, where it has grown over the last 50 years from 30% of the GDP to over 50% of GDP, and as the largest sector of the economy at over $1 trillion with well-known multinational companies, and more interesting is talented human capital at the spine of various technology innovation hubs and technology-inspired businesses. The end of the Cold War that was signaled by a series of events, the reunification of Germany, the dissolution of the USSR, Comecon, and the Warsaw Pact, and so on, carried a promise of ushering the world into an era of peace, whose dividends will be especially reaped by the countries of the global South. It was, however, a short-lived truce between the West and the East, during which Africa experienced a spate of intrastate wars, and India, on account of various security tensions in South Asia, went nuclear and joined the League of Countries with the capacity to have this capability as part of its military arsenal. Although in the wake of the end of the old Cold War and developments such as the dissolutions of Tito's Yugoslavia, the non-aligned movement to experience a crisis of mission and relevance, because the idea was, if we were non-aligned in terms of relations with the East and West, now that there was now only one superpower following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the issue is to what are we now going to be non-aligned? But they're missing the point. the non-alignment is not about just routine siding with one or the other, but defending our collective interests and principles that we believe will contribute to a just international order, whether political, economic, and technological. So Africa and India continue to work together in the creation of a fairer multinational system. And despite its size and weight, India, like all African countries, collectively campaigned for the reform of the United Nations Security Council so that they could be accommodated as permanent members. They also collaborated on the making of the UN adopted Millennium Development Goals, which has, of course, translated or transferred into the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs and Agenda 2020. India has always stood with the Africans in calling for a reform of the Security Council so that both categories, the non-permanent members and the permanent categories, that there should be a fairer representation for Asia and of course for Africa, which has the only continent with no permanent membership in the Security Council. And we have seen with the crisis that has been happening, particularly, and I hope we'll talk about this a little bit later in the conversation part of this presentation, the Russian-Ukraine conflict, that the Security Council, as presently constituted, has failed in performing its primary responsibility in the Charter. It's not Gambari's view, but the Charter says the Security Council has a primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. And so in such a situation where the Security Council is paralyzed, it shows there's a need to reform the Security Council. And therefore, this crisis, I believe this crisis should also be an opportunity to take a closer look and take more practical steps. And this requires even closer collaboration between India and the African countries to really get a reform of the Security Council so that it can fulfill its primary function, which is the maintenance of international peace and security. Now, India's success with its economic reform and the successful leveraging of its diaspora have resulted in important gains in GDP expansion, poverty reduction, the growth of its middle class, and an increase in its global reach. This has positioned the subcontinent to play an enhanced role in Africa's own search for greater investment that will help to underwrite its efforts at structural transformation. The launching of the Africa-India Summit to structure cooperation between the two partners represented an important step in the right direction, as was the participation of India in the BRICS. This alliance with China, Brazil, Russia, China, and of course, South Africa. And of course, we can discuss later whether or not Nigeria should not be part of BRICS, because it's now, apart from being the most populous country in the continent, is also the largest economy and ahead of South Africa. But I just want to take a minute to talk about the example of the Indians in the diaspora and their contribution to Mother India. This has inspired countries in Africa, including my own, Nigeria, to try to exploit and explore and exploit the position, the role and the contribution of Nigerians in the diaspora to contribute to their homeland. Before, insignificant was their contribution, particularly financial transfer. Now, as we speak, the Nigerians in the diaspora contribute more than $20 billion annually. But apart from finance, the technological know-how, their connections. In fact, several Africans, including Nigerians, have been appointed to high-level positions in the Biden administration. And that's also cuts across to states within the United States in order to try to attract investment, the participation of the Nigerians in the diaspora. So Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa to a lesser extent, looking at the example of what India has been able to do in attracting support, contribution of Indians in the diaspora. Now, the world is, however, changing, as we can see rapidly, and the intensification of a new Cold War between the West and Russia has created an evolving environment that will require deliberate steps to be taken to secure world peace to revive international development agenda to focus on global terrorism and tackle global climate crisis, enhance cooperation to tackle transborder pandemics, and reform the multilateral system, not just the Security Council that I've talked about, but also the Bretton Woods institution, the international financial system, so that it can be better reflective of the changes that have taken place in the world since the present system was established in the mid-1940s. Of these issues, India is a credible and very capable global actor, which shares a community of interest with Africa that should be consolidated for their mutual benefit and for the advancement of international stability. In the wake of the new Cold War, and in view especially of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, some have made the case for a revival of a non-alignment movement type of framework that will serve as the collective platform for countries of the Global South to protect their interests and not just getting caught up in the partisanship of other conflicts. There has also been calls, as I mentioned, for the imagination of the UN system in order to save it from the certain paralysis into which it will be plunged by the dynamics of the new Cold War. These are just two examples of the kind of issues which deep reflection is required in order for strategic choices to be made. India is well positioned to help steer the collective reflections required in Africa. It will also find willing and eager partners in Africa to engage with India. The time has come to open a new chapter in Africa-India relations, taking advantage both of the uncertainties of the time, but also the opportunities to build new partnerships for development, for peace, and progress. And we have to remember that is precisely what the United Nations was set up for. In the words of the preamble of the UN Charter, it says, we the peoples of the United Nations. It didn't say we the countries of the United Nations, we the peoples. So it's about the people, and to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in the lifetime of the founding father brought untold sorrows to mankind. So that centrality of peace is there in the Charter. Also, for socio-economic development, so as to, in what Kofi Annan, one of the Secretary General of the United States, called in the larger freedom, democratization and human rights. Nigeria, my own country, has had a pass of non-constitutional order, but since 1999, there has been unbroken succession of democratic rule and the promotion of democracy and human rights in larger freedom, which Kofi Annan referred to, not only in our own country, but in our region. But we also have tried to become a bulwark to push back terrorism, to push back non-constitutional change of government in our sub-region and the African continent as a whole. So just as India has become a symbol, of the possibilities of a country in the global south, just as the idea, as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, of India as a united, peaceful, democratic country that respects diversities and promotes diversity, that is something that will never die in terms of the enduring bond between Africa and India. So congratulations to India, to the people of India on the 75th anniversary. The best is yet to come, in my view, in terms of relationship between India and the African continent, and certainly my own, Nigeria. I thank you very much for your very kind attention and for your patience to listen to this scholar diplomat that, despite the introduction at the beginning, I always refer to myself simply as a teacher by training and a diplomat by accident. A very prolonged accident, but still an accident. Thank you very much, and God bless us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency. We appreciate your words as words coming from a very, very, very wise teacher. The diplomacy part is the secondary one. So I can say without hesitation that your words of wisdom have really resonated with all of us. And we thank you for your very kind words about the very close relationship, not only with Africa in general, but with Nigeria in particular. And also you're drawing attention to some of the issues that we are confronted with today, and what is likely to be the future trajectory of world events, which is in a deep crisis. I mean, it's a deep political crisis. There is a deep economic crisis, and I would say there is also a certain crisis of ideas. We are not able to find the kind of vision that we need to really deal with what is a very difficult situation. But we take heart from your very important remarks this evening. Excellency, in the brief conversation that we have time for, I wanted to raise two issues. One, you made the very interesting point that as the world is moving towards, once again, greater polarization, maybe we are looking at the incipient stages of another, kind of Cold War, as you said, with rival military blocs, with rival ideological blocs. In this kind of a situation, you mentioned that some people are talking about maybe the revival of the non-aligned movement. Because its relevance was questioned once the Cold War was over in 1990. Excellency, what is your personal opinion? Do you think that, for example, countries like India, Nigeria, and perhaps some of the other leading countries of the South, should we really think seriously in terms of perhaps once again mobilizing that kind of international opinion? Should the global South be really looking at a much more active and participatory role in terms of fashioning what is going to be a very different world order? I mean, cannot go back to the old world order now. It has changed whether we like it or not. So in terms of shaping what is going to be coming now, and taking a cue from what Excellency mentioned, what is your personal opinion? Given your wisdom and vast experience, is this something that we should be seriously looking at?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because as I mentioned, every crisis really should provide an opportunity, and we are in deep crisis. And the crisis is complicated by the growing inequality within countries, including countries of the South, and especially countries of the South, and inequality in the international system. So I believe we need a new Bandung spirit, a new Bandung spirit to take account of the dramatic changes in the world and the dangers, things that were unknown of. Let me just give you a personal experience. We thought in Nigeria that we would never have what do you call these suicide bombers, because one of the characteristics of the African is about community, is about family, is about the sanctity of life. But here we are with Boko Haram, with ISIS, so we have new challenges that is facing us, and we have a broken international financial system in a sense, and also a system that obviously is failing to fulfill the fundamental principles on which the United Nations has been built. So with that spirit, and I think our leadership, fortunately, there's growing India and Nigeria, for example, tremendous personal relationship between Prime Minister Modi and President Muhammad Buhari, which we hope can be developed into an instrument and a focal point to galvanize the other leading leaders of the global South to sit together, maybe a special summit, to really look at where we are. The old challenges are there, the new challenges, terrorism, climate change, and some of the linkage between even climate change and underdevelopment and terrorism in my own country, Nigeria. We've had Lake Chad, which used to be in the northeastern part of Nigeria, a source of development, of income, of livelihood. now because of climate change dried up. And so, millions of unemployed youth, creating a pool for bad people to recruit from to go and do very bad things. So all these old challenges, new ones, requires that we have a new vision, new imagination, and leadership. If you recall, the non-aligned movement was, you had the Nehru, you had Tito, you have Nkrumah, you have Gamal Abdel. The challenges, you might even argue, were simpler, but the quality of leadership and the commitment of the leadership was much higher than I believe we have now. So that spirit, that commitment is what I believe we should do, and look at mechanism beyond conferences, but really deepening the best practices and the comparative advantages that those of us in the global south have, and to maintain the principles, commitment to fundamental principles from which we will not deviate, and a fundamental principle that will guide us in dealing with the rest of the world, so that this expectation that we will, as a matter of routine, line up and align ourselves with any of the power blocks should be forgotten. That we'll look at things that will be the best interest of our respective countries and in the best interest of an international system that works, and that international system that is based on fairness.
Yeah, thank you very much, Excellency. So I would hope, Excellency, that in the very critical position, very strategic position in which you are today, you will perhaps, promote this idea. Perhaps we should start thinking about these things. As you said, it all depends upon the quality of leadership, in a sense. Not only leadership, but also imagination,
yes,
ideas, and I hope that we can begin that kind of discourse, which can take us in that direction. Because even in India, there is a certain controversy. Should we be going in a non-aligned direction, or is the world now so different that that is quite irrelevant? I think it is very important to perhaps have this conversation amongst ourselves to see what we can do. Which brings me to another issue, Excellency, particularly given your very vast experience with the United Nations system itself. In the audience, we have Ambassador Vijay Nambiar, who was also a special envoy to Myanmar, just like you, and was also associated with the UN. You mentioned, Excellency, that the UN system, for example, if we look at the Ukraine crisis, has been singularly, in a sense, incapable of trying to find some kind of solution to this crisis, and the Security Council is paralyzed in a sense. It's not able to do anything at all. You and I had served, if you remember, on a commission. Yes. Which was looking at UN reform and UN Security Council reform, how to make the United Nations somewhat more democratic, much more effective. Successive exercises like that has not really led to very, very useful outcomes. So given that situation that we face, where the relevance of the United Nations seems to be declining, year by year, what is it that you would suggest? I mean, we know that there are, you mentioned, for example, the high-level panel which had gone into this issue. Several committees have also been grappling with this. We have been talking about since ages about the, how the United Nations must be restructured to reflect current realities. We had India and some other countries had pushed very hard for the reform of the Security Council to no avail. So what in your view is the way in which we can take this forward?
Well, thank you very much for that. I would like to recognize Vijay Nambiar, that I'm glad he's in the audience, my old friend and a former colleague. I think it is the failure of the United Nations, in my view, to really address in very concrete way and a fairer way that has also encouraged the proliferations of the G7, the G20, BRICS, and so on. We need in my view, that we need a new configuration that will, I think, strengthen Chapter 6 of the United Nations chapter. One of the least utilized chapter of the United Nations, which is a peaceful settlement of dispute and regional arrangement. And that's why the support for, say, the African Union is very critical. And it's not just about African solution for African problem, which is a slogan. There cannot be African solution to African problem. There are now global problems which manifest themselves in Africa. So obviously we have to take responsibility, but there's not much support. Whereas in my view, it's cheaper to support African institutions. One of the interesting things that have happened in the last few years is the tremendous importance of African institutions such as the African Development Bank, the African Export-Import Bank, such that, say, the African Development Bank, they are now more the non-regionals, that is countries outside of Africa. There are more of them who want to come in that will now say, no, please don't come in too much and too fast, because we want to retain the essential African character. But it shows the attraction of what if the Africans are doing what is right and what is important for the majority of their people, then that and contributing, not as just a beneficiary of international system, what has to offer, but making a contribution to global peace, to global security. So it's those strengthening of institutions and the ideas and creativity of using the crisis that we have faced, crisis of global governance, crisis of legitimacy, crisis of management of diversity even. These are issues that I believe with ideas, with leadership, and strengthening of institutions, and improving on the underutilized chapters of the United Nations, this is something that, this is the direction which I feel strongly that we should be going.
Yeah, thank you, Excellency. In just the few minutes that we have left, I want to raise a question which some of our colleagues have asked. While we are facing this crisis, one aspect of the crisis is that there appears to be a kind of a democracy deficit. Not just Africa, but we see that kind of democracy deficit in other parts of the world. You mentioned how important it was to you as Nigeria that you have been able to maintain that democratic transition through last so many years, despite a history of authoritarian regimes in the past. Africa has had this more than perhaps some other countries, but there were very promising trends in Africa, as also in other parts of the world after the end of the Cold War. But it appears that there is a kind of a setback to that kind of people valuing democratic freedoms. There seems to be much more of a impatience, I would say, with democracy and democratic institutions, and looking at how do we cut through all these very cumbersome procedures, and a strong leader can really make things happen. Usually they don't. But that is the kind of impression people have. So given that trend, I mean, number one, first of all, do you agree that there is a kind of a democracy deficit? And if there is, again, what is the way in which we try to deal with this?
Yes, no, there is, because unfortunately, the understanding is really, or the motivation for of those who seek political office and leadership position has been more about the power itself, rather than concentrating on the purpose and the ends of power. And so when they get there, they slide back from the aspiration of the people that they represent. And now you have a paradox. For example, the people are impatient with the democratic dividends, but at the same time, like in my country, Nigeria, we are going to be having elections in about a year, presidential election. You know, the ruling party has, as we speak, 29 candidates for president, 29. Now, so in a sense, you might say this is encouraging that democracy is still not regarded as a failed system. But when you ask them, what would you do differently? What is your understanding of the challenges of this 222 million, the most populous country in Africa? How would you address some of the, you know, it's that debate, that discussion is not there as much. So when President Obama came to Nigeria, to Africa, he was in Ghana, and he said, what Africa needs is not strong leaders, but strong institutions. And I say, well, that's only partially right. We need strong institutions, but also strong leaders, because strong, not in terms of physical, not in terms of coercive, but in terms of leadership by example, you know, that brings strength, because that's what brings legitimacy. So the recruitment process in our political system is very important. We have to, democracy in my view is far too important to be left to politicians alone. Yeah. So we have to have the civil society, we have to get the private sector leadership involved in the process of selecting the leadership, so that the understanding of the challenges of the economy, the understanding of global economic system, how it impact. Look at the war in Ukraine and Russia. It's impacting negatively on Africa's fragile economy, on food supply, on tremendously, and it's something that has to be addressed. So really, ideas, leaders that understand, leaders that that are elected and selected in a process that is open. In other words, a much more open society. That is the only way that can, I think, address this democracy deficit and impatience with democracy. When the leadership is seen as that know, the leadership that are able, and the leadership that is committed to the welfare of the generality of people, not to just a few of the elite.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for sharing your thoughts on this very important subject. And in this respect, Nigeria is actually an example for others to follow, given the very challenging kind of history that Nigeria itself has had. And we hope that, you know, this phase of what I call, you know, dictator envy perhaps will come to an end sooner rather than later, and we can get back to the work of harder work of really strengthening the kind of the institutions that really buttress the whole idea of democracy. And yes, we need leaders who are strong, but not strong in the sense of a dictator strong, but democratic leaders who are strong, and who can really give direction to our countries, to our development. And we mentioned the role played by Nehru or Nkrumah or Tito. I think their strength was really in the realm of ideas.
Yes.
You know, I mean, the ideas that they won people over, they were able to mobilize the international opinion by the power of their ideas, you know, understanding the historical moment and what kind of response it required. And I think if at this juncture of crisis, we can have something of that kind of vision, it would certainly be very worthwhile. But it is really people like you, Excellency, who can contribute to that effort. So you have really inspired a great deal of thinking amongst the people who have been listening to you. We will be debating all the points that you have done, and I hope we can keep this conversation going. Thank you very much for being with us, Excellency. It has really been a great pleasure for us.
And just one last word. Thank you so much for the compliment. I think you reminded me of being a special envoy to Myanmar of the United Nations. In fact, my critics at the UN used to call me special envoy of the UN to world dictators because I was sent to Iraq, I was sent to Sudan, I was sent to Myanmar. But
so
I
I
always
think you are the best person to to deal with this challenge.
precisely, and that's the point. When I met Tan Shui, the senior general in Myanmar, I told him, I said, look, I'm not going to teach you democracy. I'm from Nigeria. We've had a fair share, but Nigeria, where I come from, also moved from an era that was governed by dictators to democracy with all these challenges. So maybe I can share with you these experiences, and this sharing of experiences is very important. This is what I think India, Nigeria, Africa, to share experiences, share visions, share commitment, that we have a contribution to make to our societies, to our countries, and also to the world as a whole. And so once again, I just want to end to say
thank you, Excellency, and I would hope that you will favor the Center for Policy Research. Perhaps this is one of the topics, particularly what we have been talking about. Is there some form of non-alignment which is worthwhile? What should we do about multilateralism? I hope that you will join us in these conversations in the days ahead, because we will really be able to profit from the very rich experience and wisdom you have. Thank you once again, Excellency. We have kept you for a long time, but I really thank you for giving us so much of your valuable time to celebrate this very special occasion for us. Thank you.
It is my pleasure. I look forward to coming back, and I'm able to stay a bit longer because my presence is in the air on his way.
Okay. So you have a little respite.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Excellency.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yamini.
I'm looking forward very much to see you again. Thanks a lot.
Bye. We'll have you with us very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to our audience. Thank you.
Okay, Yamini, can we log off? Thank you. I think went well.